understand the value of local bank branches, both to the livability of communities as well as the local economy. What we've heard in this inquiry is that despite making billions of dollars in profits, big banks are closing down their branches in communities that have been loyal to them for decades. We're also hearing in this inquiry that they are doing that with virtually no consultation and in some cases not even consulting with their staff. People in regional Australia contribute a huge amount both to our national economy and to the profits of banks. This is unacceptable and it should be happening. We also shouldn't see regional communities at the whim of big corporations and at the whim of their benevolence. In the past we had a publicly owned bank, the Commonwealth Bank. We saw that dismantled when the Hawke Labor government turned towards neoliberalism. It's not good enough and we need regional communities to have that.
Senator Jared Rennick, LNP Senator for Queensland.
Look at Robbie.
Yeah,
have
off camera.
Use Robbie, sure I won't.
Okay. Senator Jared Rennick, LNP Senator for Queensland. What we've learned today from the hearings and yesterday is that the banks still make as much money today with the bank's branches closed as what they did prior to they were closing. So clearly this is a clear breach of the social contract where banks are meant to provide services to the community. And in small communities like these, banking is a key pillar along with health and education. And I say if the banks aren't prepared to keep their branches open, then it's about time that the federal government looked at having a public bank to provide banking and insurance services out in regional Queensland and regional Australia. Thank you.
Senator Linda White, Labor Senator from Victoria. It's been fantastic to hear from the communities out here in far north Queensland. We've had some incredibly interesting stories and compelling stories about what it's like in a small town and the difficulties that they face and again feel that you're part of the community, particularly volunteering and doing a range of other things. The banks have definitely let them down out don't provide the service and make money from those communities, absolutely, from very large businesses and successful businesses, and they've abandoned those communities and that is just not right. What we have to think about is the solutions that will make them understand that they have a social license to operate in this country and that they need to respect these communities and the people that work and live in them. There's great jobs too that are being lost from these communities. Banking jobs are great jobs for women, the majority of whom are women in branches, and they are being affected unnecessarily in my view because those banks are still making profits and can still afford to keep those branches open to serve their community and provide back to those communities.
Senator Malcolm Roberts, with Senator for Queensland with the One Nation Party. There are several lessons coming out of this. Most of them are not really lessons, they're just confirmation of what's been going on in the past. The banks still run this country. The banks have all kinds of power. They have minimal risk because of government protection, taxpayer protection in fact. So the banks are avoiding scrutiny. The banks are still running the show. They're still running roughshod over people. The second thing is that this is happening in the regions of Queensland, which are the powerhouse of Australia. That's where the money is being earned for our export income. Agriculture and mining are the drivers of our strong balance sheet in this country. The third thing is this inquiry has seen all people working together, and that's been wonderful. It's been really wonderful. Matt, and you've chaired it well, and everyone having a dig. But the fourth thing is, it'll just be another committee with a dust gathering book on the shelf unless we make some structural changes. We need a people's bank, a public bank. That's emerging well and truly. One of the most important things of the original public bank before it was gutted and neutered was that it provided accountability because the big international banks had to face the competition from the Commonwealth Bank. The Commonwealth Bank was eventually neutered and removed, and then that lost the accountability, so now the big four banks are running roughshod over everyone. We need a public bank that can hold the big four banks accountable. We need real structural reform in this country.
I just forgot to say one thing too. We had, as a committee, invited Westpac to come to North Queensland and explain to the community why they were shutting branches here in Ingham and Tully and Cloncurry. Not long after we made that invitation though, surprise, surprise, Westpac announced they wouldn't shut branches in North Queensland. And it seems to me that the one thing the banks are most afraid of is actually having to visit a regional country town. It seems to be the only way to get them to act is to force them to come out of their inner city lifestyles and into the bush. Well, it is unacceptable for our bank executives to have a phobia of the bush going forward. These are national banks, they receive national support, and all Australians deserve for them to be offering services right throughout our nation. All good. Any questions?
Good question. Yeah, just a question for you, Matt. How have you gone in the way of finding any solutions so far? Has anything come to mind?
Yeah, well, look, I think there's a range of things that have come forward. Malcolm mentioned the government getting directly involved. I do think, though, too, we need to look at rural and remote areas, and in those areas, there's probably not going to be a commercial incentive, so we need to find a way of helping and supporting other models, like the community service model, like what we're seeing a lot of building societies do. So I don't think there'll be a silver bullet. But there is some good ideas around here that are coming forward from our committee, and I think they give us a basis for a solution. I think we should also keep in mind that if we are to go down this path, we have universal service obligations in other industries like telecommunications, and maybe that's something that needs to be looked here. We already do have a bank levy on our major four banks, and maybe that's a vehicle to help fund some of those obligations. But look, as I say, it's early days here still. I do think there are solutions, but the most important thing, we make sure we find a way to make the bank executives accountable and ensure that they keep front in mind the interests of everybody in our country, not just where they work and live. Anyone else want to add?
Yeah, I think that the diversity of our community. I think the diversity of our communities and the richness of our communities in terms of just the Aussie mateship of our communities, that's something that will dictate different solutions for different areas. You can't have one size fits all. So we need to really think about what's going on in this country and come up with solutions, come up with a scope that enables solutions for different regions.
Has everyone in the community been surprised by the maybe perhaps lack of frankness from the banks in terms of why they're actually been making these decisions to close branches? Whoever wants to comment.
Look, I don't think the community.
Cameron's got it.
I don't think the community has necessarily been that surprised by the bank closures. They're used to big banks having a city focused and not a country focused. It's something that we've seen in maternity wards over the years and the general decline in services, essential services across the regions. Having travelled Queensland extensively in the last 4 to 6 weeks, I can tell you there is a real feeling out in the regions that they aren't getting any return of the royalties and the genuine wealth they create in the regions coming back out of the cities.
Yeah, sure.
We know that regional Australians contribute a huge amount to our national economy, and I think it's a real insult for them to hear this morning in the evidence, for example, given by the ANZ Bank, that when they decided to close their branch here in Ingham, they didn't consult one person in this community, and the people who made that decision were located in offices in the capital cities in this country. So they didn't talk to the council, they didn't talk to local community groups, they didn't talk to the staff on the ground. That decision was made by people in the offices of our capital cities.
So, anything else?
Yeah, I've got some from Channel 7.
Right, okay.
I think partially touched on it, but what role does the government have to play in keeping regional banks?
Well, look, last year there was a regional banking task force which made a number of recommendations, and the banks agreed to those, but primarily those arrangements were of a voluntary nature, if you like, and I'm not so sure if that's fit for purpose now. We've seen the banks treat their agreement to have impact statements or to do impact statements before a closure as an afterthought. In fact, some of them seem to be trying to circumvent these requirements by rushing in bank closures before they were due to come into place mid this year. That behaviour from the banks to me indicates that a voluntary solution is probably not going to cut it. But we're still early days in this committee. We're going to try and get to every state in the country, and I'm sure we'll make some recommendations to strengthen requirements on our banks to ensure branches remain open or financial services remain available.
Can I just make a comment on that? In answer to that question, how to help the regional banks, is simple. Just make it a level playing field. Stop pandering to the big four and stacking the regulations in their favour. The small banks, the regional banks need a fair go, and we need to really sort out what's happening in the banking system in this country. We need structural fixes. The Hayne Royal Commission found inhuman crimes committed by some of the major banks. No one went to jail. No one. And so we have to really hold people accountable. The government needs to grow some balls and hold the big four banks accountable.
How much do you think the exiting of services from regional communities is leading to decline?
Leading to
Decline.
Well, I think the very sad thing is we've heard in this committee that most of the country towns we've been to are going great. They're growing. Their economies are strong. Agriculture, mining, tourism. People are moving to the bush through and after COVID. So it's a very paradoxical situation where local communities feel like for the first time in many years they have a bright future, yet they're getting the rug pulled out from under them by a bank making distant decisions that aren't in tune with those local economic conditions. So another reason why to fight hard here to make sure there's not unnecessary closures of banks is to give regional Australia that great future that it looks like it's on the cusp of in many parts of our country.
I think what's come through so far is that these banks are profitable in regional locations, but they're just not profitable enough according to the banks. And the real losers in their exits are the communities that they were serving. What we heard, which was incredibly important, is that many people who worked in banks perform other jobs as well, and on volunteer community groups. They are treasurers, or they are active participants in their communities. And if they can't get jobs in regional areas, then there are not often people that can fill that. And so I think it is a broader spectrum of issues that we have to look at, and that's been shown in the inquiries so far, and we can't afford to ignore that is what is happening. So it isn't decline, but it is changing the way in which these communities have operated for many years, and the strengths that they're built on, which is great community organisations, volunteers, of which bank workers are among important ones.
How many more we've got to go, Kerry?
Just two more.
Alright.
Do you think there needs to be investment in keeping young people in regional towns to drive population growth?
Well, look, the most important thing we can do for young people is to support a strong economy, support the industries that thrive and survive here, because obviously if there are no jobs, young people won't be able to stay. Places like Ingham are great places to base yourself for a fantastic weekend of fishing or going to the beach, exploring our wonderful natural landscapes. But you need to have something to do between Monday and Friday as well. And that's one of the other reasons why we need to keep groups like banks in town. There are very few professional jobs available in some country towns, and sometimes a bank, a council, or the few jobs that are there that aren't necessarily working out in the sun. And when increasingly families of both the mother and father are working, you need to provide a mix of jobs in a town to keep a family there. And so it's another reason why we don't want to lose some of the professional jobs we have, like in a bank, from a country town. Anyone else? Okay, let's go.
And do you think if banks leave, it opens up space for a new competitor?
Well, look, there's some evidence that can happen. Obviously, though, losing a major bank has a major impact for a town's reputation and attraction of other businesses. But look, I definitely think we need to look at ways to make sure that we do subject the banks to competition. We heard today about perhaps the disproportionate impact of regulations on smaller banks that aren't necessarily pursuing profit to the nth degree like our majors are. So they're good ideas that we will have to take on board, and there have got to be solutions with technological developments to make sure people have access to financial services. All good? Cool. Let's go have some lunch.
Thanks,
Thanks
guys.
guys. Thank you.